start our session, please make sure you select the English channel and the interpretation button down below if English is your preferred language. للي حابين إنه يسمعوا الحوار باللغة العربية أنتم ممكن تغيرون اللغة من اللغة الإنجليزية أسفل الشاشة. Also at the bottom bar in your Zoom screen, you can find the Q&A tab. So feel free to drop us your questions throughout the session, and we'll try to get to them towards the end of our talk. And you can also find us streaming live on YouTube on Shuruq's channel at Shuruq SHJ. And the episode will be there as well later for you if you would like to check it out. Throughout time, natural light has been one of the essential elements of architecture, integrated to emphasize an architectural piece or fill a space with spirituality and much, much more. Artificial light then came into place and opened up a whole new world for architecture and design. And as Le Corbusier said, architecture is the masterly, correct, and magnificent play of masses brought together in light. So with us here to discuss the significant role that lighting plays in the physical world, we have Ms. Florence Lam, Fellow and Global Lighting Design Leader at Arab, and Ms. Sakina Duguwala Moela, Design Director and Founder at Light Funk. So thank you for participating in our talk. Sakina and Florence, you can share your video. Yeah, hi. Hi there.
Hello. Hi.
It's a pleasure to have you both. And if you may, maybe let's begin by briefly introducing yourself. So Florence, maybe we can start with you.
Okay. Actually, thanks for the introduction and invite, staff and organizer. My name is Florence Lam. I have been with Arab for almost 30 years now. And we started lighting at Arab back in 2000. So it's almost coming up to 20th anniversary. So like many other lighting practice, we started very much focused on architectural lighting in buildings. But among all, the daylighting aspect has been, I would say, an area that we're particularly passionate about and used a lot in informing our design. And in terms of the kind of the lighting work we do, we straddle from the very artistic ends of designing light art right to the super technical, using highly complex computer programs to do analytical work. But the key objective is we focus on the human side and look at day to night from a city scale down to individual space in a building, but very much focus on the people. So that's probably a quick overview of what I do.
Great. Thank you for that. Sakina?
Yeah, so I've been in the UAE for 15 years. I've gone to university here, and as the design director at Light Funk, what I do is I lead the team in all aspects of design, you know, all the way from concept to being at site to handovers. A part of Light Funk as well is that we try to give back a lot to the community and with different initiatives by having a very inclusive community. I come from an interior design background, so I wasn't as fortunate as Florence to come from a background where I was able to be mentored, you know, from that perspective. But I've been very passionate about lighting because for me, light is everything that I feel, light is everything that I see. And I think that as such, we apply it on a daily basis in all our work. And one of the most inspirational things that I've actually ever seen was Florence presenting a paper in Copenhagen. So to be on a webinar with her, first of all, is just absolutely, it's mind-blowing. And just to be able to discuss on a one-to-one with someone who has so much experience globally, the fabric that we deal with in the Middle East, I think will be a very good thing for the viewers to listen to. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here, both of you. So let's get started. Florence, I think my first question is going to go to you. when architects team up with lighting designers and develop a symbiotic relationship, the output is spectacular in most cases, and successful, and the space is enhanced. So what elements of lighting design are critical to building design that are sometimes overlooked by architects? And what should architects take into consideration when planning a design for a more holistic approach?
I wouldn't say architect would overlook certain things, but where lighting design will bring to the table is the more experiential aspect of light and lighting. And in particular, understand the time element, the transition from day to night, particularly daylight. I mean, if you imagine architects think about the shell, they would decide how the windows with lighter position to bring the light in to create that kind of the spatial experience. But where it's short of maybe is the kind of more understanding that depends who you're designing for, people, and how you want them to best perform or remember of that space, and understanding the people of what their perception about light as well, because a lot of time depends on the cultures. A lot of the kind of preconception about light could be shaped by the climatic conditions or daylight that they have experienced, and that's what they remember, and that's what they use to overlay into the kind of the immediate now kind of experience. So light really plays this key role in connecting people to the space and make it meaningful, and almost breathing life to the building itself and give it character. And I think this is where the lighting designer can bring on board. And ideally is to have the lighting designer actually be on board much earlier on, really right at the start of the project, when the artist is conceptualizing the building within the context of the site. And the lighting designer could also sort of think about from the more environmental data aspect, how do we shape that experience from going from outdoor to indoor and through that space.
Yeah, my next question to Sakina is actually about like, when is it ideal to be included in an architectural process? So Sakina, just like Florence was saying, it's quite integral to have the lighting consultant at the beginning of a design process. But what are the challenges you face when you are brought in, or when a consultant is asked to join a project, either at the end of a design stage or even sometimes after the completion, for like in an existing building? And how would you address that?
So one of the biggest issues that we face, especially in the Middle East, and I'm sure for Florence's work in the Middle East as well, is that sometimes lighting is almost seen as a luxury because everybody looks at it from an artificial lighting perspective. They don't look at this context that she touched on of the human scale, how light affects us. And because there is such an abundance here, even more so, I've found that disconnect, that people don't think about how much we should increase the lighting consultant from the beginning, because they don't think that daylight can play a role. Most of the time when we are engaged a lot later, you know, and how do I address them? The first thing I do is because if I approach everything with positivity, I feel like, you know, whatever battle that faces me is going to be a little bit easier to manage. So one of the first things that I have noticed that we never have as a challenge is a power allocation. Because engineering, for me, especially after we've moved into, you know, such renewable energy resources, and well, LEDs, everything is LEDs, our power consumption has gone down quite a bit. So the allocation that we get, even after we're involved much later, is quite vast. We don't have that problem. The problem we do start to have is that as a lighting designer who loves what they do, you first have to say to yourself, okay, you need to understand, Sakina or Florence or anybody, that you're not going to achieve 100% of the potential that you could for that space, because that has already been taken away from you. So because we like to dream big, we want to give you 100% of everything that we can think of, you know, physiologically, psychologically, spatially, sustainably. So the first thing and the challenge is to just say to yourself, you have to do the best that you can with the tools that you're given. The second thing that we always notice is to get power where you need it, because a lot of the time, as Florence said, you're not engaged from the beginning. So there are a lot of issues that are going to just systematically occur because you weren't involved. Not because somebody didn't think of them, but because they didn't engage a lighting designer, right? So you have to already overcome those obstacles. And those obstacles are wiring. Can you get cables to those dark corners where you need to illuminate a particular space for a particular function or for a particular task or for structuring? And then the second thing is controls. So a lot of the time, controls are seen as an expensive part of what we do. But I actually think that controls is probably almost, if not 50%, then just a little bit less of what defines our lighting schemes and is able to implement those lighting schemes. So if, for example, nowadays technology is advanced, we are able to bring in controls so you can dim things wirelessly, right? But the cost of that, as opposed to, because here we do have more affordable labor and cabling and whatsoever, starts to skyrocket. So it's very difficult when you get in later to try to implement a control scheme, especially when a project is already completed. You can try to put forth, for example, a wireless solution. But if, for example, you say to a client, okay, you have this whole space and you require, 50 lighting points because it's a massive auditorium. And you say to them that you will need to be able to control the different scenes because you're going to use this auditorium for, different needs or different uses or different scenarios. Therefore, you need controls. And because it's too late, the only way you can do it is by going wireless. The cost on paper for wireless controls at the moment is vastly higher than the other ones. So that, again, starts to really constrict you as a designer in terms of what you can give to the client and to the users of that space. And then the third part, which I find is very, very frustrating, is trying to get a compromise between all the different collaborators, right? There's always a cost involved, that's fine. But trying to get, somebody who's already designed a project to then bring in a specialist who is almost not tearing apart, but asking them to change certain elements of their project and to do it in such a way that it feels like a collaborative effort, that for me is also a challenge. But how do we overcome that? I am a big contender for diplomacy. So I think that communication and constant lobbying with the separate parties is very important, and use a very kind of like collaborative language. So to explain that, okay, you need controls not just because I want to have 50 different scenes. I think that controls will benefit you in the long run. So you do an ROI study and things like that. So we try to structure it, and it's very different project to project. If it's a refurb, sometimes you don't even have drawings of the lay of the land. So you have to spend more time at site trying to figure out, what is where, can you use the same DB? And now I'm getting very technical, but essentially trying to implement lighting design in a space that is already completed is not an undoable task. All you just need is positivity and a collaborative approach. For me, I don't know about Florence.
Yeah, I think what I found very useful is if we do get to be at the table very early on and really spend time to construct a very, I would say, compelling narrative behind the concept, what the fundamental outcome the client will see, why this project, what is it trying to achieve, is what we're trying to do is not just delivering the brief, but actually we are aligning our purpose of contributing this project to achieve that higher outcome. We do that and sell our concept that way, then it's more sort of touching the client's heart. And said, if say down the line, come to the value engineering, you start value engineering, you are actually impacting what we're trying to achieve at the start. So it gives us a lot more weight in terms of influencing, and almost I say, well, that lighting have to come first. We need to get that right. 80% information, how people feel about that space, how you actually succeed as a building for people, is 80% come from the eyes, is how people would perceive that information. And lighting has just got this kind of, I won't say use the word magic, but it is this kind of subtle cue. It's like in theaters, that subtle cue, they create the right mood and subtly directs you what you look at when you come from one space to another. And that's where to focus on. You want to try to get people to move through a space quicker, let's say, whether it's inside building or outside. That kind of subtle cue can be so powerful to the people. And that's where people can remember and take away about that building or their encounters with people, or even the brand of the organization is so important. So beyond its functional lighting, is the lighting actually create values. And I think this, how we can articulate that with our client is so important. And lighting is just so important for any building, any architectural project. And we need to sort of be really quite vocal about it.
Yeah. I was actually thinking magical when you said, what is the word?
Yes.
And it is true. You don't want to keep saying it because you don't want it to be taken in a different context.
Exactly. It's not blackout. It is serious science in there.
Yeah. Correct. It's so emotional.
Yeah.
That's great. So a call for all architects, bring your lighting consultants on board from day one.
We are partners. We are partners with them.
That's true. Okay, so in another perspective, sustainability is becoming an increasingly important priority for clients. And this is something that lighting can clearly play a big role in. So Florence, has it become more important for architects to work with lighting designers to make sure their projects are as eco-friendly as possible? And is this now generally a key priority in lighting and architecture partnerships that we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. More so, even more so than before. You mentioned the word sustainability, and to a lot of people, sustainability, they start to just jump straight into energy saving, energy reduction, reduce light levels, and so on. But I would like to challenge that sustainable design is more than that, more than just about reduction. It is what are the kind of the social values that lighting could add as well. So use of daylight, a good use of daylight already is a good energy saving, but the additional value is health and well-being for people. So all these need to be come in. So the challenge is, can we now start shifting, because you mentioned the word eco-friendly, shifting from pure sustainability, sustainable design into more restorative, more regenerative. When we design for an environment, particularly outdoor environment, is for the people, but also is coexisting with other biodiversities around us as well. So it's designing for darkness is just as important as designing for lighting for people so that they can enjoy the outdoor space at night. So it's how to strike that balance. And when we can, even more powerful is actually how lighting can help with social interaction, enhancing the understanding of culture, and people sort of together as really addressing the health and well-being side. So I think this term is important, but we need to sort of also educate and expand and stretch it. Is what it really means is this kind of holistic approach. And even with architecture, they now, when they talk about sustainability, they also very much focus on reducing carbon, use of low carbon materials for the facade, urban greening of facade, greening infrastructures. So that is a huge opportunity for lighting to contribute. It's not just greening, they see it at the day, but in nighttime, 50% of the time of the day, how we can maximize the utilization of those space that people can really enjoy for all 24 hours.
Yeah, and I personally love what you're saying about it affecting the social aspect, and that we need to broaden the term sustainability when it comes to lighting, because For me, as an architect here, I feel like it's very frustrating when I hear that it's only about LEDs, and lighting is much more, it can be sustainable in much, much more bigger, broader terms. So it's great to hear that.
Yes, and also daylight itself, it is a very important toolkit that as light designer we need to use, and also playing the kind of the natural changing in the quality of daylight. I mean, through the sunset. I think in the Middle East probably you have a much shorter sunset sunrise time, but if you're more the northern atmosphere, those kind of transitioning time is longer, and you can feel the kind of the light changes as well. And that's really it's added dimension that lighting designer can use and play with for their space, and also how light interact with materials, glass. Other tilings, stonework, bringing all those essence out. It is that's kind of interactive with the light. It will be so magical again. I have to use that word.
So before, Florence, you said something about how light actually interacts not just with us socially in this urban environment, especially outdoors, but with other biodiversities. What is your thought? And this is just a very personal, curious question on the use of colored light in outdoor environments, because especially in the Middle East, a lot of the time, a lot of my clients have this natural affinity to color. So, I don't know with you in a much bigger practice, how you contend with that, how you feel about using color in such an environment.
You say color is beyond the warm and cool light, is that right?
Yes.
Yes, that's great. I have no kind of particular, I would say, opinion. The more important thing is the meaning we're trying to project through light. What's the story that we're trying to tell with the light? I'll give you an example. The Beijing water cube. Remember that building? Bubble light. You think about water. We put in LEDs into the facade, integrated into the ETFE fabric. As a lighting designer architect, the first color that I think you come to mind hopefully is a blue color, right? A blue or cooler white, warm white, whatever, but it's a blue color. This is how we conceptualize, because we link that as a story about aquatic, water, the blue sky, the blue water, and so on. And then that is how the whole story was sold. Not every project depends different part of the world that lighting designer get to stay on right to the end of the project. So you expect someone down the line decided they want to change or make the best values out of whatever they're paying for. So in the end, what you get is a rainbow of color, because you can have 16 million different colors, and then again you have a bubble or the water cube that you have the multiple different color in every single bubble point. Yes, you can do it, and maybe for some kind of festive celebration that might be quite interesting. But I think as a lighting designer, I would really have loved to see it just in blue, maybe different shades of blue, but not that kind of multiple colors. So unless there's a very strong story behind it that I'm just not aware of, this is the kind of thing, if there's a good reason, something meaningful that you try and use light and color to convey, then yes, absolutely. But when it was just becoming a bit random, and I mean, as a lighting designer, as a professional, I don't know what you would think. Is not sure about that in that extreme.
Thank you, Sakina, for that question. It's
no worries at all. It's always a point of contention, even when the lighting community here gets together and we have different discussions. And the reason why I actually brought it up is it was a project that we worked on in Zanzibar, which is, Zanzibar is a dark sky environment, and trying to speak to the clients and explain to them that, the lighting levels that had been already proposed by a particular company, I don't know who they were, they were just beyond what he needed in a dark sky environment. And actually the zoning that they had given him was also very, very off. And, it took a lot of convincing to try to get the zoning to be changed, because we're talking about almost master planning And then the other thing that we had to also try to, bring back was this use of color, because a lot of the time, especially me being African, we have a tendency that when something is trendy, when something happens to be seen in a magazine like this beautiful cube, it starts to become a trend. And to try to educate clients and to explain that this is very subjective, it's very contextual, is a battle that I think I face, and I'm glad to hear that Florence also still faces it on a daily basis.
Yes, yeah. I think just think about another project in the region, the Zayed Bridge in Abu Dhabi. It's got different colors. It's got colors being applied, but it was applied with a lot more thoughtful thinking of certain festive days. Then you use different colors, and that is kind of completely agreed with the client, understanding the cultural background and why certain color is the right color for that particular festival. And also what we try to do is to use different colors for different face of that bridge to bring out the form of the bridge, because it's pretty unique. And then using color in a kind of more artistic way, rather than just pumping rainbow color changing randomly on a project. So I think this thoughtful thinking is so important, the storytelling side.
Yeah, so it touches on what you said before about, lighting also being used as a branding tool. That is a branding tool for the city.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Najla.
No, this is quite interesting, actually. But I'd like to touch upon now the well-being. Just like Florence, you were saying that health and well-being is also another aspect. So, Sakina, when it comes to well-being, I feel the role of daylight is undeniable in a built space, and with advancement in building technologies, we see bigger demand for it day by day. So how do you address the concerns and the misconceptions that clients have regarding thermal comfort and other aspects here in the region, especially?
Yeah, so without not taking it seriously, I always say, can we go with triple glazing first and foremost? Because that already will help. But on a serious note, like as thinkers, because lighting designers, we are thinkers. And if I put my thinking hat on, it just goes back to being involved at the beginning, right? So when the architect is looking at, for example, at the orientation of a building, and they start to map the sun path, they're looking at shading. They're looking at their massing studies. If they engaged us early on, then we can look at how to manipulate the different characteristics of sunlight at different times of day. Because naturally we do acclimatize to the sun path, and realistically, if we look at it like where I live now, the sun does pitch between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. So when they're working on a particular type of project, and you have a Florence or a Sakina or a Courtney or anybody involved from the beginning, we can immediately say, before they start to coin their space planning, where we think particular areas need to exist. Because, for example, we worked on a really, really small cafe. And when I say really small, I think it's the smallest project I've ever worked on, 30 square meters. But it's in a very important area in the Middle East, in a city, which is a downtown environment full of commercial projects. Now, the general arrangement of this cafe has been made to maximize the view of anybody who's sitting there, right? But when we actually mapped our daylight calculations, we had a look at it and we realized actually they don't get that much of a view because of the massing around them. So if we're able to be involved from the beginning when the massing studies, even from an urban scale like ours is, we're able to then get involved and say, okay, I do understand that you want to have a certain amount of openings in the space. I'm not refuting that, but is there a way that we can angle them differently? Is there a way that we can do this so we can manipulate light to go where it needs to be without having the thermal, dissipation that goes with it. And then we can manipulate light to not go where it doesn't need to be at the same time, because we can't have light everywhere. our cognitive senses, if we've got too much bright light, you'll go out and you'll be fairly confused because there's no visual hierarchy. And if you're stuck in that environment where everything is bright all the time, it will actually affect you psychologically. There's hundreds of studies out there that talk about it. And then the other thing was as well, by having, all of us involved at the beginning, we can also look at this whole idea of thermal cooling. So my favorite is when we sit down and we start to look at how different services fit together. So, you've got your HVAC, you've got all your firefighting and so on and so forth. Most of the time, the amount of inlets and the amount of outlets are calculated dependent on, the size, the occupants, how the traffic flows within that area. We're not refuting the number of outlets and inlets that need to be there. However, perhaps if we're involved at the beginning, we can say, we think because we need this amount of daylight in at a certain amount of time, and this is when we get most amount of sun, which could create a bit of a warm space, perhaps we can relocate that outlet there and have the inlets placed differently. So for me, you can go from a tiny, tiny scale, like the little cafe that we're working on, to a really, really massive scale where we're talking about even having, farming, biofarms in the Middle East, and actually be able to manipulate light. One of the things that an architect asked me that I respect very much, they said, what is your feeling on, vertical farming? I said, I think it's a great idea, but actually if you engage a lighting designer and a horticulturist and everybody else is involved, you don't need to go out and look for, the LED light fixtures that help you get your plants to grow. You can orientate it in such a way that you can look at it from the beginning. But I've prattled on a bit. The biggest challenge that we face here, I've touched on it before, is that sometimes people don't think that natural light is important for other typologies of project. The only time that it ever comes up is when we're talking about healthcare. But we spend about, the majority of our lives working. So why should we not look at how we can harness daylight in our work environments, and in commercial spaces? It could be something as simple as placing the desks in a certain way. So you get, having mobile desks so you can move them, to a different part of the office. So essentially, the thermal issue is that for me, it exists, but it can be very much controlled, especially from the beginning. There's no reason why we should run away from daylight because we're scared that we're going to get a bit warm, because we can tackle that, from the really, really, really at zero, ground zero.
Agreed. Definitely 100%.
Florence?
Yeah. Yes, I think apart from the thermal issues with daylight, I'm trying to sort of strike a balance there. There's other issues there, like it's about glare. And glare could be serious. It depends on what kind of work you're trying to do, screen-based work, display in transport terminal or airport, that's catching the kind of reflection from the sun is not useful, not helpful at all. So that's why sort of the early planning stage, getting line designers on board, daylight planning is so important for space. As I said before, say, if you think about an airport, you could have, it's a big box, that's how you bring daylight in, two choices, either through the facade or through the roof light. Apart from the environmental, cost is always a concern as well, because glazing is more expensive than the shell of the building generally. And so how you make use of that budget, glazing budget between facade and roof light, it's a very important balance to strike. So if the lighting designer have an idea of this is the amount of percentage of glazing over floor you can play with, then that's a choice of, if you imagine you walking through this airport terminal, coming through to the check-in hall, going through the security immigration, there's a lot of equipment, cameras that are very sensitive to light. And at that point, you just want to get through your passport control. You just don't want to do anything. And then through those immigration, you then in a retail concourse that you should be enjoying a space, whether it's food and beverages or shopping, or just relax before you get on the plane. or you look out to see the plane, because some people just love seeing planes. So all these things need to come to play. There's the kind of storytelling, the journey of departure. How do you make it de-stress for people? And also for such a big space, it's like sitting within a city. How do you bring, Sakina mentioned about vertical farming, but other kind of planting, whether it's indoor trees, green walls, etc., in the space. All this can be played quite strategically as part of the daylight planning that we can work with and create a space of placing light, daylight, roof light, as if they're light fixtures, but then it change and then it can sort of morph into different function of the space. And then this is where they become an artist about daylight design. That once we have this kind of storyline, conceptually how that kind of work as a sort of light profile, the experience that people should have that can help to enhance the experience of going through a very stressful airport, let's say, is how does it work? And then also be aware of those technology that's in the space as well that can work or not working with daylight. There was a case that we have come across before is an airport, and they've just replaced all the face recognition cameras, and those face recognition cameras can deal with daylight as well as nighttime, but it's not working. So we just our client wonders, why is it not working? So come to us and we help to unravel it. So what we find out is it's not about the light, daylight, sun hitting the camera. They have dealt with it, they designed that out. What happens is actually getting to the side. So if you imagine the sun shining on you, you start squinting, your face will be very different. And then you can't recognize you anymore. So everything got slowed down. So it's this is the human side. The human side is so important to understand, like people, how they work, emotional aspect, but also physiological aspect that when the glare hits, squinting and everything changed. So it's all those things that are built into it, and the professional lighting designer would be able to anticipate or have that kind of dialogue to diagnose what the real needs are for the clients in this space.
Yeah. There's one thing that I wanted to touch on, because Najla had sent us all the questions, and that was that this whole thing of educating the client, and when I say client, it's not a bigger entity. It could just be someone who's engaged you to come in and give them advice even on lighting design. And when you start talking about daylight, especially for me, I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle because I'm on my own. There is nobody there to support me, to explain, someone who can say, yes, what she is saying about the health and well-being of having natural daylight far outweighs having artificial light and things like that. So when we don't have, for me here in the industry, we all, lighting consultant, engineer, brand, supplier, we all work together from the beginning to the end of a project. But when you start your journey on daylight, you don't have a brand or a supplier or an electronics engineer to help you. So you have to really pack ready for that fight and go in and talk about that. Another thing that I have said in the past, for example, and it wasn't as a slide, it was more to just say, I think that the materials are too bright or too shiny. So they're doing the right thing, so because Najla had sent me these questions, and I thought, how do I actually talk about that without coming across as trying to say to an architect or an interior designer, potentially.
I think it's also, it's an individual, us being inquisitive as well and observant. I mean, if we walk down the street, we can see sun hitting a building and then get a reflection and really have a bit of glint in your eyes. And then you link to other stories or horrific stories of a building with a concave facade surface, focusing the sunlight reflection and then start burning something else. You just think, okay, so then there's a conversation that really daylight has got the two sides of the coin that you need to be able to explain. At the early stage, you always tend to, and that's what my experience is with the mechanical engineers, less glazing is better, thermal is an issue. And then you have the QS saying the same thing, cost is an issue, less glazing, do you really, really need that much? And then I think if we can be reasonable is, yes, we can do that, but it is this kind of experience of the light. If we can, mean, sometimes with atrium, say big tall office building, atrium is a space that it is more transition, but as people have to feel the core, the heart of the building is. So sometimes what you do is going through a reception entrance space that you probably have a bit more subdued light, so coming from the street into that level, you buffer your experience, and then suddenly you immerse yourself in a wow, big volume atrium space with interesting materials, kind of give you a bit of dynamic light, sunlight animation. It's a very different feel. So it's just having that kind of theatrical story. Yeah. Then that means that maybe you don't need a lot of daylight. You put the meters out there, you don't need that much daylight. But by conditioning people, they will feel that kind of opening up because they can't remember exactly what the reading is on the street. But coming through, they remember what the last space is. And it's kind of playing with that is the art of light that a lighting designer can do. And we imagine and we tell that story. And then we get the stuff and making sure that it works in the office with a computer.
No, that's brilliant. I just wanted to ask you, I think I remember, and I was saying this to Najla before you came on, that there was a talk that you gave or a paper that you presented in 2013, perhaps in Copenhagen, of a space that you had designed with daylight. And I can't remember if it was in Chicago.
Is that a museum project? Is yes. Acropolis Museum in Athens? Yes. That, I love
it. Beautiful, and it was fantastic. And then the urbanscape started to develop. And next thing you knew, you had this beautiful light graffiti that you didn't expect or want in that space.
Yes.
And
I think it's actually a very good example. I mean, that is, we call it Museum Daylight. So I was quite privileged to be able to work on that for the kind of display that is stone or the original color paint is gone already. So conservation is not so much of an issue, but it's a sculpture. And then you play the theater work of how do you bring the kind of the 3D modeling of a face of a sculpture, a goddess, alive. And that was fun. But also, I think what I really enjoy that is also the client himself is a professor of archaeology. He got so much to tell because it was his lifetime ambition to build this Acropolis Museum. So all the old sculptures and pediments and metopes and friezes can all be put in one place, can reconstruction. And ideally, he would have liked the whole world to give all these stones and marbles back to Greece so that they can display all in one place there. But of course, it defeats some of the kind of history that's happened before. But anyway, he was so passionate that he's so engaging in explaining how each different goddesses, the way how even the hair are braided together, means for different ages, why they're done in a certain way. So you listen in. So that's the kind of how you can enrich the story about light, because until you have the right input, you can't just come up with something from thin air. So that was a really enjoyable project for me because I learned so much about the Greek history and then also how the Parthenon was built, how was it like day one, how the kind of the royalties come and see it. So it is this kind of story behind the work that I think we as professionals feel very fulfilling because when we've done it, hard work, tears, sweat, and so on, but you look back, you also learn so much through that, going through the hard work on that project as well.
And then lighting is what brought, I think, life to that project as well, and eliminated all these stories that you're talking about in that museum. I would love to visit that one day.
Yeah, I would love to go back time and time again. And different time of day will be quite very interesting as well. The nighttime is very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, as you've been saying, lighting is exceptionally important to the success of a building. So it can have an impact, like you were saying, on the surrounding and on people, and it touches, their soul and tells a story and everything, and also on a city scale. So do you think as technology advances, Florence, that lighting will play even a more instrumental role in creating places that work well for people?
I would love to, but there's a lot of work to do because I think a lot of cities, certainly in the UK and London, that there is a lot of standards in place, very prescriptive standards in place. And the governance side was set up that there is a certain part of the local authority and boroughs with all they would like is just that number achieved for different road, different sidewalk, etc. But with the advancing technology, the opportunity is much bigger than that. And when we have the public bodies scraping to find the investment to address climate change by replacing a lot of street lights, traditional lamps with LED, those investments, those demand is 1 in 20 years time. So it is so important we catch this opportunity to really bring the aspect of how the nighttime could be designed differently, or even after dark could be designed differently. That it doesn't need to be always on. Just rely on pure street light is not good enough. There's just so much more we can do. So a few years ago, what we realized that among the lighting community, probably we agree with each other very well that we can do so much about the public realm space. But when you talk to public or anyone who's non-lighting professional, you ask them, describe the space. What is it like at night? And then they'll say, it's bright, it's dark. That's the end. There's no other adjective that they can probably use. So there's this education prospect you need to do. So what we've done, we ran a nighttime campaign. We set up exhibitions. We interview public, just trying to sort of get them to stretch out their vocabulary about lighting. And we do night walks with them as well to understand how they feel about the space, how does it associate a perception of safety about the space to the lighting of the space. And then when we have these kind of interchanges, it's an educational process. So when we then come back as a workshop that we're trying to sort of envision what it could be, then it's a lot more to come out of them. That I think everybody will work in a more participatory way, that they all want to contribute. And some of the social issues, only the locals will understand. And then they will try to explain why there's certain groups of teenagers might just congregate in that corner, but part of the road. And then as lighting people, we come in and have a look at it. Is it lighting or just some other things that is going on? And why? I think the more important is, why is it the daytime and nighttime being different? Because where the difference is the lighting. It's not because of the social construct or whether it's trees or shrubs around that create shadows, that sort of things. So it's understanding that. So apart from the exhibition on the back of it, we also work with our in-house foresight team to look at what goods look like in different parts of the world. And a lot of those initiatives was tried as a pilot project. Some of them could be led by light art as well, and how a space could be transformed from a normal public realm lighting to something more interesting. Maybe light level could be even lower, but people feel safer. Why is that? And so those are kind of been pulled together. We put in the publication called Cities Alive, and addressing the 3 particular themes around the good outcome for well-considered lighting. So it's covered from general basic accessibility, safety, to how you can actually create shape and urban night, so addressing the nighttime economy, to health and well-being. People feeling safe, they'll come out at nighttime. So after work, they just don't stay at home and watching telly, but it's actually coming out and have social interaction, mingling with their friends. And that's will really help on the mental health side, apart from the physical. So all those things we look at how different countries, different cultures, that kind of social activities at nighttime, where there's a particular social reference. So that was back in 2015. And so we have continued our work to understand people better. One of the aspects we have studied is the perception of safety for women and girls. The need for that does vary between different regions. But certainly our research was started in Australia, and that is working with a group called Free2Be apps. And they've been collecting data for women and girls, daytime as well as nighttime. So any time throughout the city of Melbourne, Sydney, and a number of other ones as well. And where we draw our data is looking at the differences, as I said before, differences of day and night, the negative kind of comments would particularly just get at nighttime. We collected the number, I think there are about 900 different data points that we have. And then our team, the lighting team, went into those sites and looked at clues from a lighting. What might lighting have make a difference for those specific sites? So some of this, the findings we've drawn out is really useful, because it's like playing back to the municipality. Understanding is not just a lighting designer intuitively believing you need quality lighting, you need to light a public space like an outdoor room so people can enjoy, but there are actually hard data to demonstrate it. And it's the reason why it's important to demonstrate it is we don't want a public space to be designed that is non-inclusive. If a space is designed in a certain way, what does it mean when women and girls cannot use that space or use that route? And that's kind of forbid them to either go to work or stay longer in the library before coming home. There's a huge social implications. And other things to look at is also about social inequality as well. Why certain public space in a certain neighborhood are lit much better, more sensitively. And then there's certain other place is lit really brightly, but it's one big projector just projecting a space, a public space, as if it's like a prison courtyard. That's, watch out, criminals are going to be there. Yeah, it's like a purge with that space. So this is what I call social inequality. Why is that different perception of space? It's only a bit more considered thought can goes in, and it will be very different. And people will respect the space when you actually treat the space nicely with quality finishes, quality lighting as well. So it's a bit of chicken and egg, but it is so important, I think, for lighting designer to be able to, I would say, articulate and be vocal about the differences, and that these kind of data is so important. And we need to sort of take a lot of good research, take it into practice as well. And I think that's when we can really change and make a difference. Sabrina, I don't know how does it.
I'm just like mind blown because obviously over here, all of the I should say exposure that I've had to it is using this data for clients to inform certain decisions. So they've used it a lot on retail because obviously we're very retail focused society. But it's so interesting that you are doing all of these in a social context, because, for example, one of the things that I have always spoken about, especially to Sharon and Martin, that you know really well, is this kind of like not a refurb of public spaces that are not being used, especially in environments where socially not very but somewhat stinted, you don't get the same opportunities. So these, like for example, I was speaking to my dad about this. I know it's a bit kind of like that way, but my dad and I, we speak a lot about these things. And one of the things that we realized in Tanzania, for example, is by 2025, the 75% of the population is actually going to be between the ages of 17 and 22, which is massive. Unemployment is quite high. There's a lot of different things, and obviously we have a problem with what do they do socially? Where do they go? What do you do with them? And you know, the idea of having this app and reading their behavior and allowing the government and other NGOs to step in and be able to do that is very interesting. And the fact that, as you said, we need lighting everywhere. Even in Africa, we have, you know, lighting in areas that I've shown up to a certain area, and I said to Dad, oh my God, there's a street light. He said, yeah, we're developing. It might be one street light, but you know, that could also be able to collect and distribute this data. I think one thing that I agree with Florence on is that this is the way forward, especially when we look at the public realm. Sure, there's these massive drives of replacing, you know, luminaire heads and so on and so forth. But the fact that technology has changed to a point where we are going wireless, everybody's so connected. You know, at any given point, if I can't find my phone and I'm on my computer, I can go on web WhatsApp and ring myself. You know, little things like that means that lighting is almost catching up and holding the Olympic torch, if you like, of getting all of this data across. So it's just so exciting to hear, you know, about all of these things that you guys are doing, because it's very rare, really, that, you know, Florence and I would be sitting in one room talking about all the different experiences that we've had, her at Arab and me in the Middle East. So it's just, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, and then how all these are converging, and I think this is a moment where design designers is a great opportunity for us to influence for better lighting, better quality of lighting.
Yeah.
And we need to sort of hook onto it, because if we're not careful, this kind of smartness, IoT, lighting, etc., could turn lighting become a data infrastructure.
Yeah.
Then the planning side becomes how close a sensor needs to be between light fixtures.
Yeah.
Rather than light is for people. If you happen to use that light to position a sensor, that's great, but it has to be designed from a people's side come first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I was actually thinking when you were mentioning how data and technology are used to actually impact the social life, to impact, have a better quality of life. It's much more than how the smart lighting, started, where it's all about just energy consumption and maintenance and all these things. And yes, that is an important aspect, but then I feel the much bigger impact is what you were talking about, is for people to feel safe, for people to admire their city, to enjoy it, and that's basically what decision makers should be aiming towards, I feel.
Yeah, and those are actually a much bigger agenda for the municipality to deal with, how to deal with, let's say, aging populations and all the sort of inequality side in society. Housing, maybe other issues, and mobility as well. So the digital side is a good means to achieve the ends of what the real sustainable development outcome is. So we should be a good steward to take our clients through that journey.
There's one thing that Florence had touched on before, that people just see, they say it's either dark or it's either light. It's still such a, okay, lighting as an industry is still very young, right? Lighting design as an industry, we are tiny little babies, we're still crawling.
You're a baby. No,
I mean, it's an industry when you compare it to civil engineering and architecture. So people still don't understand that what we do is not for the beautification of cities, really. It's nice to have that as a secondary outcome, but our primary passion and everything in between is to enhance spaces for people. And those spaces are indoor and outdoor. They can be healthcare, they can be work environments, they can be F&B places, but when we win a project, it's not a high five because we won a project. It's because, yes, we get to transform another space. We get to inform other people about how great use of lighting can really benefit the people that are going to be in there. And I think that is the one thing that constantly, as Florence said, you put in your design narrative, you sit there and you convince them. Once you've convinced them of that, then you can go in and do all the right things that you know about that they don't need to know about. So if there were more of us, I think the world would be a much brighter, happier place.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Totally agree.
Sakina, I'm very interested in touching upon the initiative that you have, Lightcation.
Oh, yes, lightication. Yeah, no, I mean, how do I put lightication? I think for me, lightication is like the first thing that I engaged in before I even moved to a schematic stage of any project that I find at Lifetime. And it really just embodies my take on life, that everything that you've ever received, you should give back tenfold, however many fold. So being a student in Dubai, I was incredibly curious and starry-eyed. I was watching the skyline transform. There was nothing, that I looked at and I thought, oh, that's boring. But I was very excited about it. But by the time I finished my second year in interior design, I was starting to get really frustrated because I'd see all of these beautiful places and I didn't understand how the process actually worked to get them to become that way. So I didn't quit university and go to work because I think my mom would have flown over and dragged me physically. But I did have the opportunity to intern at ERCO, and I worked under 4 amazing lighting designers at the time. And they really just drove me. They spent so much time with me. I would be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. a lot of people in the industry know about the story, so I won't bore you about it. But then I thought, how great would it be if all of us could do the same for other students? So what I decided to do with Lightication, which means light through education, is to get students to discover the magical qualities of light, but also equally exciting to see the real process of design. So what we do is we put together a team of students with a mentor who's an independent lighting designer, whether it's a studio or an individual. And then we give them a theme for the year. So we've already had 4 years of this process. And the process is a little bit simple. The students come from an architectural, interior design or engineering background, or they are actually studying it. And the industry experts collaborate with them. So the outcome is that they are able to build an installation which does require form, which does require material. So they have to physically go out and scavenge for materials, and they get a very, very small bursary to supplement the rest of it. The lighting designer will engage industry experts and bring in light fixtures and everything. And then they take that theme and they create a lighting installation that is truly a journey that the whole team has coined through. And it's online, obviously. So the first 3 years we had Lightication run within the exhibition that was Light Middle East. And then last year we went global due to the Women in Lighting initiative. There were ambassadors around the world who wanted to do it. So, well, because of COVID, we're not sure if we'll do it this year. But the idea is the outcome you get are these beautiful installations, which are an interpretation, personal and collaborative, of each team of that year's theme. And it's just a really beautiful process because the students have really appreciated it. They haven't had that opportunity to sit and start on paper and draw an idea and then actually build it and see how it works. And it's just been absolutely incredible. So yeah, that's what it's about.
That's great. And it's definitely a very, very good opportunity for all these students to learn and participate and be hands-on, you know, with their designs and everything. So that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I have to stop them sometimes and say, please don't use the drill because you need to have somebody around you. But I've really been shocked. There was one installation that they took conduit pipes, I mean, physical 2-inch pipes, and they cut out a silhouette of Sharjah, and they welded all of these tubes on the back, and all the holes actually made the face of Sharjah. They didn't win, the other 2 teams won, but still I thought it was incredible. So yeah, it really, really gives them a good opportunity.
That's beautiful. I think we've run out of time. This was a very, very, very amazing conversation. I personally learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure that everyone else did as well. Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I would just have to say thank you for organizing, inviting me. You really have got us talking. I totally enjoyed the session, the exchanges with Sakina and you as well. It's fascinating. It's great to talk light and architecture sometimes rather than just.
Yeah. The only thing I want to ask is, Florence, are you sitting in a greenhouse? Because it looks like you're in a greenhouse.
This not sitting in a greenhouse is my background, but it's a project background. A project in San Francisco about 15 years ago, and it is a greenhouse. It is a glass boiler with a rainforest plant view in rainforest plants inside a building. And where you see the circular are the skylines that bring daylight in as much as possible, and then we top up some kind of life support lighting for those real rainforests. So you imagine San Francisco and the Amazon is quite a different kind of climate, and we're trying to sort of work through and see how we can get the light working as much as daylight and artificial. But I just love that it's kind of this surreal feel to it as well.
Yeah. No, it looks like you're in it.
Check out. one more thing to look at when we go to San Francisco, Sakina.
Oh, yes.
I
Another
don't
place
think
to
I'll
go.
get there, but I will be online tonight.
Great, thank you.
Just as Florence said, thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you both. And on behalf of myself and our panelists and Shuruq, I would like to thank all of our attendees for joining us. And it has been a pleasure working on this series with the Shuruq team and hosting really amazing speakers week after week. So for now, it's goodbye. And this is our final talk of the Designscape series, but hopefully maybe we'll be back sometime in the future with more talks and amazing consultants and people in general. So until then, stay safe and goodbye. And thank you again. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.